Module 1 Lecture 2 The Antisocial Letters. This group has been termed the antisocial for reasons that will transpire later on. Mainly, they're to do with how some of these letters connect, or otherwise don't, with other letters in certain situations. The letter Aleph is not actually a letter, but has been placed in this group because it shares some of the characteristics of the antisocial group. However, due to its unique features, it will be dealt with separately at the end of this chapter. The first letter that we have is called Dal. The Dal looks like the letter C, but in reverse. The sound that it produces is a softer and lighter version of the English letter D. Whereas the letter D requires you to place your tongue above the inside of the upper front teeth and caress the inner gums, the Dal requires you to place the tip of your tongue directly on the back side of the upper front teeth. It more closely resembles the relaxed pronunciation of the word the that you normally hear in casual and informal conversation. Spanish words such as donde and diablo are exact equivalents. It's not too difficult to remember this letter. Simply draw a line from the top edge to the bottom edge of the letter, and you have what looks like the letter D. The letter D, being the closest approximation to Dal, should remind you that the letter Dal produces a softer and lighter D sound. Time for a bit of practice. As usual, first let's say the name of the letter followed by its phonetic sound. Dal. D. Dal. D. Dal. D. The next letter that we have is called Dhal. The Dhal shares the exact same appearance as the Dal, except that it has a dot placed above it. As for its sound, you may recall me saying that the Dal produces the sound equivalent to the English D when used in a relaxed and informal manner. The Dhal is equivalent to the English the when pronounced as it should be, with the tongue placed beneath the upper front teeth. It will be especially a good idea for you to listen carefully to this letter to make sure that you are pronouncing it correctly. Let's use that dot above the letter to represent the floating head of an angry teacher in the distance saying, "Pronounced your the properly." Practice. Dhal. The. Dhal. The. Dhal. The. The next letter that we have is called Ra. The letter Ra is essentially a curved line that begins above the writing line and curves southwestward below the line. Around 2/3 of the letter hangs below the writing line and 1/3 remains above. The sound that it produces is most closely seen in the English letter R. However, whereas the English R is a steady, smooth sound, such as in red or ready, the Ra has a bit more going on. If you're able to trill your tongue, then you're halfway there. When you trill your tongue, the sound reverberates like a motorcycle engine. The idea is to isolate one of these reverberations and you have the ra. If you know a bit of Spanish, then you'll be familiar with this. Spanish words like Roberto or rápido have the same sound. It can be quite tricky to master, but once you do, it's a truly wonderful sound that gives Arabic that bounce and flair. So, keep rolling the tongue, reduce its length, isolate one reverberation, and you've done it. For me, the letter ra looks a bit like a boomerang. I imagine myself throwing a boomerang and shouting, "Boomerang!" whilst emphasizing the ra within it by rolling it. So go out there and try it, but be careful not to take anyone's head off. Practice. Ra, 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 ra. The next letter that we have in this group is called Zay. Much like the Ra, the letter Zay has the same boomerang shape, except with the addition of a dot placed above it. The sound that it produces is exactly like the letter Z in English. Have you ever watched the film The Mask of Zorro? If you are familiar with the film, you will recall Zorro's classic signature sword swipe, where he cuts out the shape of the letter Z. Imagine the dot in the letter Z is Zorro's floating head, and the curved line is a gigantic Arabian-style curved sword that he is wielding across. That image of Zorro should bring about the letter Z, and remind you of the Z sound in the letter Zay. Practice. Zay, Z, Zay, Z, Zay, Z. The next letter that we have in this group is called Wow. Its shape is very similar to the Ra and the Zay in that it has that familiar curved boomerang curve that drifts under the writing line. The difference is that it begins with a small circle above the line. It kind of looks like the number 9. The sound that it produces is the exact same sound as the English W in words like Wednesday or walking. If you've grown up in the 80s, then you will no doubt be aware of who Woody Woodpecker is. Woody Woodpecker is a cartoon character, specifically he's a bird, with big oval-shaped eyes and a long sharp beak. The letter wow is almost identical to him in that the circle of the wow represents his big eyes and the curved line his beak. The wow reminds me of good old Woody. The W in his name quickly reminds me that the letter wow produces a W sound. Practice. Wow. W. Wow. W. Wow. W. The final letter of this group for now, excluding the alif, which we will deal with later on, is called the hamza. The hamza is the only letter whose name doesn't really have much to do phonetically with the sound that it actually produces. Its appearance resembles the letter U in English that has been tilted slightly to face northeast. In its isolated form as above, it will sit on the line, but in other circumstances, it actually sits on other letters. We shall discover more about this when talking about the alif and the chapter entitled Letter Forms. The sound that the hamza produces is what is known in the grammatical world as a glottal stop. Put simply, it's that sound that we find in English words that begin with vowels, like the sound in the word aha, or the sound in the word understand, or the I sound in the word igloo. It's that initial sound that we're really interested in. Note that strictly speaking, the transliteration for hamza is a single quotation mark. Since the hamza looks somewhat like the letter U, simply use the initial sound in any English letter that starts with the letter U, such as umbrella, to remind you that the hamza has that initial sound. Practice. Hamza, 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 Well done! You've now completed the second group of letters, the antisocial letters. Summary. Listen, repeat, practice, and perfect. Once you feel confident and have perfected these letters, move on to the next section.